Namaskar and welcome back to Media Scan, your weekend dose of headlines, controversies and perspectives. India's vaccination pace is going up by the day. In fact, we are vaccinating more people in one day than the total population of many countries. With so many festivals lined up in the coming months, this is really reassuring news. But the global media continues to display its double standards in reporting issues related to countries like ours compared to their home turf. So we are going to discuss that in just a few moments this evening. But first, what made news? The five-nation influential grouping BRICS has called for refraining from violence and settling the Afghan situation by peaceful means. In a summit this week chaired by India, BRICS nations released a statement underscoring the need for fostering an inclusive intra-Afghan dialogue so as to ensure stability, civil peace, law and order in the country. Addressing the summit, PM Narendra Modi described the BRICS as an influential voice for the emerging economies of the world. Separately, the visiting Russian NSA also met PM Modi and discussed the Afghan situation, among other issues. More than 58% of the eligible Indian population is now vaccinated with at least one dose, and our pace of vaccination is such that we are vaccinating more people daily than the total population of many countries. What's more, 3 times in 11 days, we crossed the 1 crore mark in a day. While this is reassuring news, it's no time to lower the guard. That's why PM Modi held a high-level review of the COVID situation on Friday. To benefit the farmers, Centre this week announced enhanced MSP for all rabi crops much before the crop season. A 40 rupees per quintal rise has been announced for wheat. The Union Cabinet also announced a 10,000 crore rupees PLI scheme in the textile sector to give the industry a much-needed boost. Another high point of the cabinet meeting was the green signal to an ambitious purchase of $2.5 billion C-295 transport aircrafts for the Indian Air Force. While the central government continues its efforts to strengthen farm incomes, normal life was disrupted in some parts of Haryana due to the Sanyukt Kisan Morcha's protest in Karnal. The agitating farmers sat on dharna outside the mini secretariat and threatened to throw life out of gear in few cities too. However, towards the end of the week, a resolution was visible as farmers and the administration came to an agreement. 2 significant peace agreements signed between the centre and the insurgent groups this week are expected to go a long way in ensuring peace in the northeast region. The first was an agreement signed between the Home Minister Amit Shah and 5 insurgent groups operating in the Karbi Anglong region. With the peace deal, 1,000-odd insurgents surrendered with their arms and joined the mainstream. The second agreement pertains to the ongoing peace process in Nagaland. The centre signed ceasefire agreement with the Nikisumi-led Khaplang faction of the NSC and IM. The development will give a boost to the peace talks between NSCM-IM and a conglomeration of 7 Naga nationalist political groups. So those were the headlines, viewers, you saw over the week in the media space. Viewers, there has been a sudden spurt of cases in the US and some other Western countries of the COVID positive virus. Looking at the coverage of the COVID surge in the US in the recent weeks, it was natural for people in India and some other parts of the world to compare that coverage in the US and the Western or the global media with the kind of distressing coverage we saw over the COVID virus when there was a sudden spurt in the cases in India, which we now know as the second wave. This, coupled with the fact that a well-known expert on South Asia, an academic, a researcher, was shamelessly shut down on air by a well-known network of the media from the Western world, has raised a lot of questions about the double standards of the Western media, particularly in the US and the UK, vis-a-vis countries in our part of the world, especially India. This has raised a lot of questions, and naturally, the debate was reignited about these double standards in the media, in the Indian social media platforms, also in a section of the mainstream media in the past 1 or 2 weeks. We'll come to those questions one by one with a very interesting and special panel of guests here with me this evening. I have here with me on Media Scan this evening a well-known activist, commentator and columnist on India and India-related issues based in the US. I want to introduce you to my first guest of the evening on Media Scan, Avatan Skumar, a well-known activist, columnist and analyst based in the US. He is the president and trustee of Indica, which is a chapter of the Indic Academy, of which also he is a trustee. You have been watching him very keenly in various social media platforms, reading him in websites in the US and newspapers and websites in India as well. Welcome Avatan Skumar on Media Scan, and a warm welcome particularly because this is your first appearance on our show.
Namaste Smitaji, thank you for having me on your show. I'm really delighted, and hopefully I'll be able to share some insights.
My second guest for the evening is an equally strong voice in the social media and a well-known hardcore ace news reporter of the country. Let me introduce you to Rohan Dua. He is now the co-founder of the new media platform being launched, New Indian. And Rohan is also joining us for the first time on Media Scan. Welcome, Rohan Dua.
Thank you so much, Smitaji, for making me part of your program. It's always a privilege to rub shoulders with the like-minded people, and I'll be glad to be part of this discussion.
With this very interesting and special panel of guests here this evening, I hope we are going to have a fruitful discussion on these sensitive and complex issues. So let me not waste any more time. I want to first come to Avatan Skumar. Avatan Skumar, do you agree with the allegation or the concern, if I may say, that the Western media, particularly in the US, has been exercising double standards, especially vis-a-vis India or some other countries in this part of the world? Or do you think it is something that is a kind of, if I may use the term, third world syndrome, and people are just being too touchy about it? Your perspective.
I would agree that there is definitely a bias, and the bias is a legacy of our colonial past, where people always thought that they knew, first part is that they think that they know about India more than we Indians know. They think that they also, there is a part ignorance, and there is also arrogance that they come with, right? If you think of James Mill, for example, he wrote the textbook that the British administrators used to read before coming to India. And he had never been to India, and he didn't know any Indian languages, but he claimed that he didn't need to know anything about India. He read the translations in French and whatever other languages, and he claimed that he knew everything, so he did not need to know. So there is that kind of arrogance, and that has carried over to our colonial period. You look at the Macaulay, right? He famously said, "Oh, मेरे तो closet में सारे जितना भी knowledge है about everything about India can be confined in my one library closet." So those kind of things are there. The recent bias that you can think of is also ideological, in the sense that there is a media is, believe it or not, a lot of people believe that it has a left-wing bias. And since now there is a government that is not left-wing in India, they do have a bias against it. So I do definitely agree. And it's not only U.S. media. We have Indian agents in the media who also perpetuate the same kind of biases.
All right. So you are saying that if I may use that proverbial term, the white man's arrogance, coupled with the recent change in the political situation, the kind of political assertion India is coming up with. So these two factors have coupled together to show the kind of bias that we keep seeing in the media. At least for the past few years, it has become very palpable. Let me bring in Rohan Dua here into the discussion, and then I shall come back to you. Rohan Dua, very clearly Avatan Skumar agrees that yes, there is a bias. There may be double standards too. It has political as well as colonial factors. I just want to know from you, have you been monitoring the coverage on COVID and other related issues lately? And what do you think about it before we come to other finer points on the subject?
Smitaji, you rightly described that with the proverbial phrase. I would go a step further to call it its hegemonic masculinity of the international media towards the third world. When it comes to talking about COVID, nobody bothers to check the facts and figures emerging from the United States at the moment.
Yes.
Took back 50,000 cases of children who went to schools when they were reopened last month were reported in certain sections of media, but not many in this country today have the gall and audacity and temerity to question United States' ability to not control this surge. While 4 months ago, when the second wave, when India was riddled with the COVID second wave, everybody started questioning Kumbh Mela, the Kumbh congregation, which did not even see more than 50,000 people in 1 week. And elections were happening. Most of the political parties across India were participating in that electoral process, which is a democratic right of every Indian. Not many questioned the fact that all the political parties were taken on consensus, on board, when the elections were being held. So when it comes to the Western media's bias or prejudice against India's handling, this pattern I seem to see only over the past few years or so, and only those media outlets who have got together with certain leanings, either due to their ideology or otherwise.
Will you like to explain that, Rohan Dua? I mean, why has it become so prominent in the past few years, if it was not so for decades?
No, that also sort of surprises me. If you look at the kind of welcome which the Biden administration received, and the kind of, I would say, the rude or the curt behavior I saw by a certain section of media across the world when the Trump administration was handing over the reins to the Biden, that sort of shocked me to no end. A reporter or a media outlet is supposed to be neutral and supposed to wear a neutrality badge over their sleeves. Considering the fact that only last week we saw a leading TV channel, a leading broadcaster in the UK shutting down, I would say, one of the well-known scholars in the world who has given so much to this world on what Pakistan's
Rohan Dua, sorry to interject you here. I'll come back to that particular incident in just a few moments. But on the specifically on the coverage of the COVID crisis, I want to bring in Avatan Skumar here, because I want to know from him, who is there. I'm sure there have been incidents and congregations and gatherings and political meetings in the US as well. But I have been through all those stories. I hardly see such correlation of the people's activities with the virus or the spread of the disease. Do you agree with Rohan that yes, there is a deliberate attempt to connect our Hindu assertion, or if I may say our civilizational assertion, with the spread of the disease, because there is a point these people want to make? Avtans?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the Kumbh Mela, or any other protests going on, CAA or farmers' protests, they are not considered a super spreader, but the Kumbh Mela is considered a super spreader. The same way, if you look at when President Trump, former President Trump, hosted a Rose Garden event, few people tested positive, and everybody was saying that it's a super spreader event. But we had, throughout the pandemic, we had the Black Lives Matter protests, and all dozens of other protests in all over the U.S. in the big cities, and they were never considered a super spreader event.
So
We
are you
also
saying,
had,
Avatan Skumar, are you saying, sir, that the kind of bias based on political thought or political leanings is actually being applied in the US as well? It's not only about India. Is that what you're saying?
absolutely. That's one of the points I'm trying to make, is
Okay.
that when the Rohan talked about the hospitalization and cases and all that, but when we talk about you hear a lot about Florida, but you don't hear about Oregon. What's happening in Oregon, right? Okay, and then the same way, what happened in California? What's when you overcount and undercount in one, undercount the deaths in California, in New York, and overcount the deaths in California just for political purposes. So those kind of things are there. Same when they talk about kids hospitalization, they give you the number just to show that the situation is really bad. But you have to also keep in mind that most of the kids, younger kids who are hospitalized, are not COVID hospitalized. There were many more mental health hospitalizations, RSV hospitalizations than COVID hospitalization. You'll be surprised to
So,
know
Avatan
that.
Skumar, allow me to interrupt you here, but I must get this clear, and please explain it for our viewers, sir. If it is all so starkly political, how do we go about it? I mean, the media is supposed to bring things to the world as it is, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm really, out of answers, because the media has really been totally discredited over the last few years. Even I'm not even talking about politics. Just even look at the science. Remember, Lancet, the famous medical research journal, had published a paper about HCQ, hydroxychloroquine, right? And it was all over. The reason for publishing ended up being purely political, because President Trump had said something about HCQ. We now know that Lancet had to retract that paper. We also know it was everything, all the research was fake. There was nothing was done. There was no research. All the paper was fake. When people talked about the lab leak theory or hypothesis, Lancet was one of the first one to totally reject it initially.
Okay, I get your point. Point taken, Avatan Skumar. Let me just ask a slightly related question to Rohan Dua as well, in his experience as a reporter. Rohan Dua, you just heard Avatan Skumar explain to us how when even medical research journals are not devoid of politics and they go by the prevailing political thoughts, are we seeing anything about the India's vaccination pace in the global media platforms, newspapers, websites? And if we are not seeing anything about this vaccination, which was being questioned for months, by the way, why do you think we are not seeing it?
In fact, Smita, I was traveling in Hyderabad when the vaccination process, the two vaccine candidates were emerging in India, Covaxin and Covishield. What pains me today as a reporter who has largely spent his life in the hinterlands of India, covering the stories of people, covering the stories of researchers, scientists throughout the last quarter to 2 years. I take a sense of pride that I have visited vaccination centers. I take a sense of pride in having met the biotechnologists and scientists who are behind isolating the COVID strains. Two important issues I want to bring now that you have mentioned about the vaccination procedures here in India and not getting enough mileage across the world. One important issue which I want to talk to you about is the vaccine hesitancy. At a time when COVID's second surge came in India, not many in this country had the courage to tap the shoulder, to tap the back of co-vaccine maker. Instead, they went on to perpetuate a myth that Covaxin contains calf serum.
How does it help, Rohan Dua, for
Now,
anybody in the political sphere in the country, be it any political party, to discourage a homemade vaccine that is being prepared? I mean, how does it help anybody's political cause?
precisely my point. Several scholars in between, independent scholars across the world, including Lancet, including BHU, IIT, and across the world, they publish journals that those people who have got infected with COVID and are going to take the first shot of Covaxin, are going to develop far richer immunity than the other vaccines in this country, even better than Sputnik. And on one hand, we have these researchers coming out, which I have reported. I have gone personally, met those scientists, biotechnologists, spent time with them to understand what makes Covaxin such a potent vaccine to handle COVID today. And on the other, we have these people who are perpetuating the theory that it contains calf serum.
So if I get you correctly, I gather you are trying to make the point that it is not only about political biases. There may be serious players in the field influencing the media, whether in India or on the global platform, because they may have ulterior motives in not seeing India come up as a, an Atmanirbhar, a self-reliant manufacturer in the field of health or other sectors. Is that what you are saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. To a large extent, there were many backers of foreign companies who went on record to write these stories, to write these social media influencing tweets to ensure that people stop taking vaccines such as Covaxin.
So that's another very, very serious charge, or I may say one of the factors which play into the biases that we see being published, Allow me to bring in Avatan Skumar here on a subject which you actually raised, Rohan, but I'll come back to you on that a little later. Avatan Skumar, on the subject of a well-known broadcaster of the world shutting down one of the most reputed academicians and columnists of the world regarding this part of the, South Asia, this part of the world. How do you look at the entire incident? Why does it suit certain media houses, in fact, quite a few of them, to show a single stray law and order incident in India as a huge indication that India is now plunged into religious terror and fascism and all that, whereas an entire government which constitutes people who have been named in the list of terrorists is now become a government of stalwarts. And an expert, a reputed academician, when she raises it, she is just made to go off air, very, very unceremoniously.
Right. So that's what I talk about, arrogance. Some of the arrogance is that they think that they know everything that is to be known about. And then there is also, look at all the the politics behind it, all the fundings behind it, where it comes from. There is a huge political backing in terms of, especially in BBC, if you're talking about that. They have, excuse me, they have been not only peddling all sorts of, I remember when we talked about, when we were having Sardar Patel's statue, they came up with all kinds of data to prove that it's not, it's not going to work. And then we give a lot of aid to India and things like that. So they are still in colonial mindset that they try to perpetuate. And specifically on this episode, it was pretty obvious that they did not want the truth to come out. Whatever she was saying, she has a very strong reputation. She's very outspoken. It's not that she is pro-India or pro-Pakistan or one way or the other.
Let me get a comment. I understand your point now, Avatan Skumar. Let me just get a quick comment from Rohan Dua, because I'm afraid I'm running out of time on the show. Rohan Dua, you just heard Avatan's on that episode of the BBC. But it's not really just about the BBC. Our larger question we want to raise here on Media Scan is, there is a counter view to this in the country as well as abroad about the fact that what if the global media, any of the section of the global media writes or broadcasts these things? I mean, why should we care? Our country is to be governed and our narrative is to be decided by people living in India. Should we really bother about what is being covered there? I mean, that also is a counterpoint, to be the devil's advocate. Do you think these narratives matter? How seriously are they to be taken and why?
I believe that we need to take these narratives very seriously. One, because the kind of attitude or the kind of scornful attitude which we saw from BBC last week, shutting down a renowned scholar who has extensively reported on the two countries, pains me to the extent that it is this kind of attitude which foments trouble in countries like India, because we have already seen separatist movement in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, conflict region in the last 30 years, if you see and observe the kind of politics which you have seen there, most of the people settle there, take the scholarships, take the fellowships to go to these countries and work with them. And when they come back, they bring back the same ideology, bring back the same pattern, they bring back the same tone and tenor to approach the crisis situation which Afghanistan is facing at the moment. And that in turn gives birth to issues which become security concerns for India's paraphernalia. So from security concern, such sort of attitude by the Western outlets, especially what we saw last week, I believe it's time a country like India and the leading scholars here, the analysts here, the journalists, take it to them and tell them that what you did is wrong. And what you did was only to foment trouble in the heartlands of India.
Understood, Rohan Dua. So I am afraid I'll have to stop you here because that's all the time I had this evening. But viewers, very clearly from the analysis of both our guests who have explained the subject so well to us, it becomes very clear that while there is no denying the fact that there are biases and double standards which affect the coverage of an assertive, a rising India in the Western world, it is also true that it may not be a great idea to maintain that aloofness on our part and say that it doesn't matter, because certainly it matters, and why it matters and why it is fraught with dangers was very clearly brought out by Rohan Dua just now. On that note, I am afraid I must wind up for the evening. So viewers, allow me to say goodbye and thank profusely my guests here, Rohan Dua and Avatan Skumar. Thank you very much, Rohan Dua. And thank you, Avatan Skumar, for connecting from Chicago. With that, viewers, I'm afraid I must wind up now. It's sign off from my side. But do keep watching DD India as we continue to scan the media for you. Good night.